It's time to take a ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive with our co-hosts, Alan Saunders and Zachary Smith.
Welcome back to another episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. That is Alan Saunders. Alan, I'm going to be honest with you. It feels kind of weird today. It's a Friday, but it doesn't really feel like a Friday. The Steelers have played a ton recently, do not play on Sunday. It feels kind of odd to me. What about you?
It's like having your bye week in week 17, which is very strange.
Yeah.
But I think it's needed from the Steelers' perspective. I mean, I think they needed this time off. It's been needed from my perspective too. I'm excited to get refreshed for a long playoff run here. I don't know if it's actually going to be as long as maybe we thought, but I'm ready for it.
I hope that rings true from your mouths to God's ears. Football God's ears. Anyways, what we're gonna do today, and honestly, I feel like a long stretch coming up here because this is kind of like a mini bye. We're looking for questions, topics, questions, whatever you want. So drop those in the comments for a future episode. But we're gonna be going through some of the stuff that we got so far through the YouTube community as well as our Twitter communities. So it's been a while since we kind of just dedicated episodes directly to that and didn't have a ton of topics coming into it. But that's kind of the state of where we're at right now, as Alan said, kind of like in a bye week in a week 17, which is very odd. But one thing that I really found interesting as I was going through the YouTube comments here was somebody said, how would you kind of, if you were going through now, kind of re-rank draft needs as opposed to what you thought they were going to be for the 2025 draft coming into the year? So if you would have looked at the roster before this season started and felt like you had a pretty good idea of, okay, this is what they got done this year, weren't able to check all the boxes, this is who we think is going to maybe be going, like hitting free agency, maybe this is whose deal is up or whatever, and this is what they need to bring in. But what have you seen at this point in the season to maybe re-rank those needs? Where would you put them as we sit here right now?
It's interesting because I don't really think a lot of them have changed, but maybe you could change the order, but I don't think like the positions have changed. So like you knew that you had kind of two spots that the Steelers sort of obviously needed this past year but did not address, and that was obviously wide receiver, and then also like any kind of future plan at defensive tackle. Like that, those were the two things that, like, maybe they could have done in this year's draft that they didn't. They kind of got left on the cutting room floor there as it was. Then you got two positions where they filled them through free agency with kind of uncertain stopgaps, and that's outside corner and quarterback, right? Where you kind of knew those positions got filled, but for this year and how well those positions were filled going forward was going to depend on a lot. How guys like Dante Jackson, Cam Sutton, Russell Wilson, and Justin Fields played this year. And then you got the positions that you kind of saw opening, and I think that's mostly running back, right? It does not look like the Steelers are going to extend the contract of Najee Harris after turning down his fifth-year option. So, like, those to me are the five positions that, like, will dominate the conversation as we move into the offseason. And I don't think any position has been removed from that list, and I don't think any position has risen to the level of the rest of that list. It's still those five. The only thing that's changed for me is maybe you want to tweak the order of operations a little bit.
Yeah, I'll be honest. Like, even I'm pleasantly surprised with what they've gotten from Dante Jackson this year, especially from like a ball production standpoint. But I think it's pretty clear, like, when he's not in zone, you can't really ask him to press. And I think he's gotten exposed, especially down the stretch here a little bit in man-to-man situations. I think they're still looking for that guy. And maybe like Corey Trice, we just talked about him. I thought he took a step. Now, is that something you want to put all your eggs into that basket? Because to me, that's just like a lottery ticket that if it hits, great. But I don't know that I'm just like, yeah, that's your answer opposite of Joey Porter Jr. So I think cornerback for me is up a little bit higher than I expected it to be, I think, coming into the season.
Yeah, I talked a lot this morning about quarterback. I'm not sure I really think we're going to have that answer until we get to the end of the season. But certainly, like, no matter what happens with the starting job, there's also a need for depth. Like, I expect the Steelers to draft a quarterback almost no matter what they do with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields this year. And so I think that'll still be fairly high on the draft board. How high, I think, really depends on whether Russ can stop his last rough 2 games and get back to the play he was playing before, which was, and I thought, way better than I expected. And so, like, even still on the total right now, I think he's been at or above expectations for this year. But if he's able to get 2 more games in, or maybe even 3 more games in here, at or above the level he was playing before, then I think that would pretty much solidify him coming back. But they're still going to need depth at the quarterback position. I don't see this team as like wanting a first-round quarterback almost no matter what, though. It's not a very good quarterback class. And, like, they just went down that road with Kenny Pickett. It failed fairly spectacularly. If it's not Russ or Justin, I expect it to be another veteran quarterback. So, like, as terms of draft needs, like, to me, that's like a day 3 thing. You know, I agree. I think cornerback has risen and I think the need for speed in the secondary continues to be an issue. When you look at going up against a guy like James Worthy and what he did to them, you know, Dante Jackson's really the only guy on this team that can run with him, and that's a problem, especially because Dante's not a great man corner. So, like, they've got to find a way to, I think, improve their team speed in the secondary. You know, Beanie Bishop, not the fastest corner in the world, and then Cam Sutton just does not seem to have the same speed he had before. So there's a lot not working in there, and I agree. I think the secondary has moved up the list for me a little bit.
Yeah, I was thinking, like, coming into this season, my thought was, in an ideal world, and, you know, we haven't necessarily seen this come to fruition yet, but you were done with the offensive side of the trenches. Hopefully you got the pieces there and you can kind of shift your focus, applying that same idea, but on the defensive side now, and start to replenish that defensive front. Wide receivers stayed in that conversation because we've been talking about it for a year and a half now, seemingly. But realistically, like, I just think that, you know, those 2 were kind of what I came into this year thinking was going to be at the top of the board. Same thing with running back, though, expecting that they were certainly going to add one, just didn't really know where to place that one. And then, yeah, like, it's when you talk about corner, okay, there's 4 right there, but not saying that those are going to go into that order. And again, you have free agency to supplement that as well. So it's super interesting. But again, like, until you have the quarterback thing figured out, it's kind of hard to say what the rest of the plan is.
Yeah, how much money does that quarterback thing take too? You know, Russ is probably going to take, I would assume, at least $20 million out of this year's cap hit, and maybe more. You know, and then you're looking at what they do with the backup situation. You know, do they want to make a run at T. Higgins? Do they want to make a run at one of the top free agent corners? I think those things are possible and on the table, but probably not if they're spending $40 million at quarterback this year. And so I think they've got to figure that out first. I do expect Russ to be back, but I'm also expecting that he will kind of pull out of this little skid he's in and get back to the play he was having before. If that doesn't happen, I don't know. I don't know how you can invest that kind of money on a 34-year-old who finishes the season with 4 bad football games in a row like that. That starts to feel questionable to me, and I think everything really flows from there. Running back's really interesting to me too, because, like, I think the play of Jaylen Warren over the last few weeks, where he's really, you know, been healthy and looked like that guy again, to me, just even further solidifies the idea that they are not going to re-sign Najee Harris. That's going to be Warren as a 1A with somebody else as a 1B next year, whether that's through free agency or the draft. I haven't really looked too deeply into the running back free agent class, but, you know,
No,
I can't see Najee
good.
Harris coming back.
Yeah, well, I think James Conner getting paid in season was very good for Najee Harris. Like, because I think he stands well above now anybody else that's hitting the open market. So very good for him.
Yeah. And Ramondre Stevenson right before. And like, it's a big deals for both of them.
Yeah, so I think he's set up pretty nicely there from that perspective. This is an interesting question. I don't know if you were ready to get away from this, but I think that this is interesting to at least tie in along with it, because this is, again, Omar Khan coming to us with a question here. So appreciate Omar for tapping in. Omar Khan Artist, the handle here, said, keep getting pushback on this, so I'll ask and get your opinions. How is it better to bring Russ back on a $33 million per year deal, if that's the case, than to get, say, Kirk Cousins on basically the same thing that we just had Russ for this past year?
Yeah, there's an interesting thought there to just, like, you know, be the team that is the rebound team for quarterbacks, right? Like, I think there's a thought process that works there. I think the Steelers have been really enamored with Russell Wilson, the person, and I think he's a really good culture fit for them. I don't know anything about Kirk Cousins, the person, if he would be or not. Um, Cousins also was very recently very highly sought after. So
Yeah.
the Falcons paid a ton of money for him this offseason. I think there's going to be a bigger market for Kirk Cousins than 1 year, 1 million or whatever, this year. Even, like we had talked about when the Steelers were pursuing Russ, that yes, you're going to want to pay him a minimum salary in year one to make the previous team pay the maximum, but that all goes away after year one. And in terms of Russ, nobody was willing to offer that second year of a deal to sort of sweeten the pot for him. The Steelers obviously didn't have to because they were able to get him, but nobody else really made them either. Nobody went that far. I get the feeling somebody would do that for Kirk Cousins, and put a second year on a contract in order to land him. And so then I think it becomes not quite the same comparison. But I don't hate the idea in principle. I think Russ has been – I think the Steelers really like Russ, though, and I think they would like to keep him.
I just thought about something, and this is not a prediction or anything like that, but it'd be hilarious. You've talked about this before, waiting for one of these teams to just kind of take a Moneyball approach at the position, and just spend elsewhere. That's kind of going along with this thought. But imagine if the 49ers, who have been linked to Kirk Cousins because of Kyle Shanahan in the past, were just we're not paying Brock Purdy, and just brought in Kirk Cousins.
They should. I think they should. I'm all for it. I think it'd be hilarious.
Yeah, that was exactly the first word that I thought of too, was hilarious. Angry Yinzer.
Look, Sam Darnold is probably a better choice if you want to go down that road. Although he's going to be expensive, but I think, to me, I can make a better case for spending the money on Sam Darnold than Russell Wilson than I can saying hey, this cast off might be better than the cast off you already got. I don't know. I like the concept of just trying to moneyball the quarterback position. I think there's some value there in that. I'm just not sure the Steelers are the right team for that with aging stars on deep. This 2025 very much feels to me like a sort of last hurrah type season for this defense, the way it's currently constructed and the way it's currently being paid to put it all together one more time before there's going to start to be some churn. And I don't think they're going to want to have unnecessary question marks. I think they'd rather give those guys the quarterback they feel like they can trust. And I think Russ has earned that trust.
And that is kind of the same reason that I agree going back to the draft thing, where I wouldn't see them turning the keys to a first-round draft pick, quarterback with this roster.
Just no chance. Even if somebody really good falls, I just don't see it.
Yeah, absolutely. This kind of ties in with drafting, I think, as well. That's where we're probably going to take this conversation. The Angry Yinzer said, why are the Steelers no closer to a Super Bowl appearance now than they were 6 years ago?
Well, I appreciate the question, Angry Yinzer, but that's really, they're 6 years ago they had Ben Roethlisberger and now they don't. That's why they're not closer, because it's a lot harder to build a team without an elite quarterback. And between 6 years ago and now, they've gotten a lot farther away from the Super Bowl than they are right now. So, I don't, the 2018 team had a lot of the right ingredients. They should have been very good. They weren't. That was a bad team. That team underperformed its expectations significantly. Since then, they have not had the ingredients. They still don't, but I feel like this team is probably the closest they've come since then. So I don't really understand I feel like the premise of the question shows a lack of understanding of the situation.
I think there's been, throughout that time period that you're talking about, there's been a lack of having enough on both sides of the ball. I think it's for a lot of the period of time, it's been They didn't have the complementary ball on both sides. They had either a really good offense or a really good defense. This is probably as close to and I'm not saying the offense is good, but they have some semblance of an offense when they have an actual NFL offensive coordinator and an actual quarterback right now on this roster. I know there's been some weird stuff going on the defensive side of the ball, but this is probably the most complete roster that they've had within this time period that we're talking about over 6 years. I think this kind of goes back to like why I said about the drafting thing. I think that part of this answer could go to that as well. Like if you want to talk about maybe the roster isn't where you feel like it should be at this point in time, as opposed to where it was at that point in time. That's one thing. You can point to some draft misses, obviously, but like if you look at just the way the roster is right now, they've overachieved this year based off what they are on paper. But
yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that the first moves in preparing for a post-Ben Roethlisberger Steelers tenure were unmitigated disasters. The 2021 and 2022 off seasons were horrific. There's no other way to describe it. Like Najee Harris was a terrible draft pick when it happened. Almost everybody said so. It has turned out to be that way. Their first plan for reinvigorating the offensive line, just straight across the board failure. Certainly there are some good picks in there, but like the overarching ideas, signing Mitch Trubisky, drafting Kenny Pickett, like none of the moves that hiring Matt Canada, like basically the entire plan outside of like Pat Freiermuth and landing Jalen Warren as an undrafted free agent on offense failed. You knew they were going to take a step back when they lost their Hall of Fame quarterback, and then they stepped in shit with their first move after that. And now, then the hole got deeper in between. And now I feel like there are some really strong signs that offense is coming back up the other side. Now, the real job for Omar here, and the real tough question is, will they be able to get this offense good enough before this defense starts to get so old that it's not great anymore? And I think we're already seeing some concerning signs on that front at the tail end of this season. I think that's a very pertinent, very tough question for the Pittsburgh Steelers is, can they get this offense in order before it's too late? I don't know the answer to that question, but I think that's the real question. They're way closer to the Super Bowl than they have been at any time since Ben Roethlisberger still had all his elbow tendons.
Yeah. Well, I feel like fair or not, I think for the reason that we're talking about with including the age of the players on the defense and, how expensive they are, that's why I think that the clock is ticking for this and why there is a lack of patience from the fan base to see results.
I mean, I understand that, but it doesn't make it reasonable. I get, I know. There's just this team has greatly overachieved its personnel already as we sit here before the rest of the Week 17 games have been played. How far it will overachieve them, I guess it remains to be seen. But look, they made it pretty clear that their goal for this season was to win a playoff game, and I think that goal was very aspirational considering what they were working with coming into it. And the fact that it looks like there's a decent chance they can accomplish that goal still right now is a pretty huge win as it is. I don't know what people were expecting from this season, but I don't know how you could be disappointed with what they've got so far. I just don't.
Talked about it yesterday. I think if you swap those 3 games for the Vegas Jets Giants games at the beginning of the year, this past 3, just flip where they were in the schedule, I think it's a different conversation. I think most
people are messaging me about oh, maybe Rooney will get tired of Mike Tomlin. I'm like, Mike Tomlin has done an excellent job this year. If there was angst about Mike Tomlin after last season, I think some of that could certainly be appropriate, especially the way they the collapse in December and some questionable personnel decisions in there and all that. But this team is way ahead of where it should have been. You can't fault the coach for that. You just can't. You can, but it sure doesn't make any sense to.
Yeah, and I think it's like there's a lot of people I know that would rather just like completely bottom out, and maybe there's some frustration with that as well. Is like because within this period of time post Ben Roethlisberger, that hasn't happened. Like they've remained competitive. They've been over 500 still every year, obviously, and they've made the playoffs 2 of those times. So, I think maybe there's some frustration within that as well, where there's people that would rather just completely bottom out and have a high draft pick and hope that kick starts where they're at, because their retool or rebuild, whatever you want to call it, hasn't looked traditional because they've still been pretty good.
Yeah, and like I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that point of view. I will just caution that there is no guarantee that you ever come back from that.
Look around the league.
That you can tank 1 year and then be bad for 30 in a row. Like there's no, and if the thing you're specifically looking for is a hotshot quarterback, look, if you had the first pick in the draft for each of the last 10 years, how many of those times would you have drafted an actual elite quarterback? One? Like,
yeah,
Joe Burrow. That's the only one, right? That was like drafted 1-1. Like Allen was later. Lamar was into the first round. Like you could literally have the first pick in the draft every single year and still not come up with that. Like playing the lottery is not a business plan. Like you just can't bank on that. You got to keep taking shots. That's why I expect them to draft a quarterback this year almost no matter what. But there's no likelihood of success there that makes that a smart play.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I want to switch the conversation
also,
a little bit here. Okay.
How this team is too good to tank. They're like the 7th best team in the league. Do you know how hard it would be to tank when you have at the same time,
do the people that want that to happen trade TJ Watt? Like, is that what they're wanting to have
at the
happen?
same time, they are not particularly close to the real contenders, and also miles and miles better than even mediocre teams, let alone actual bad ones. Like, it would be so hard to make this roster so bad that you could actually tank. Like, it would be nearly impossible. Like, they're not, and Tomlin's too good of a coach. Like, they're just not, like, it's not going to happen. Maybe you have a perfect storm of injuries, but like they had a shot at that once, and they found their way out of it. So, like, I don't see it happening.
Yeah. Ben Roethlisberger gets hurt in game 2 of 2019. They still finished 500. A lot of concern, obviously, about the defensive.
Because I didn't say it out loud. I have said it before, but the Rooney family aggressively does not believe in that, like, under any circumstances.
Sure.
Some people say, like, would you rather be 10-7 forever or be 3-15 1 year to be good again? They would rather be 10-7 forever. You can win the Super Bowl from 10-7. You can't from 3-13. They're trying to do everything they can to get every team they can put on the field as close as they can to winning that. They're never, ever in a million years going to do that. They're just not.
Absolutely. I think a lot of the frustration right now with the fan base obviously comes from the defensive side of the ball. Terrell Austin, obviously the defensive coordinator, and his name has been thrown around in a negative light ever since this last game. Honestly, this 3-game losing streak. Arthur says, do we believe Robert Saleh is a potential DC, a viable option for them? Have you even heard, like, do you think it's even a shot that the team moves on from Terrell Austin as we sit here right now?
I will have to do some research. I don't know what Austin's contract situation is. I highly doubt they would fire him. Maybe if his contract's up, they would look to go a different route. I'll have to do some digging there. I believe Robert Saleh is already working for the Green Bay Packers, though.
He is.
So, I imagine that if he's going to take a non-head coaching role, it's going to be with someone he's comfortable with already. That's generally the way those things go. And again, I want to, like, the Brian Flores thing everyone brings up, like, Flo wanted to be a head coach. He knew that wasn't going to happen here. That was not him being the defensive coordinator for the Pittsburgh Steelers was never an option for either side there. That was not part of the deal. That he had to go work for an offensive head coach to get the opportunity that he really wants. He knew that. He found that opportunity. Very grateful for the Steelers to get it, but like that was never happening.
Yeah. I mean, I understand. I understand it though, because you see, like that guy was in the building, and then you see what he's doing with Minnesota. I understand everything that you're saying and fully accept that, but it is just it does kind of suck to know that that guy was in the building for 1 year.
Yeah. Well, I think the fact that they didn't replace him is the real. Like, if you really want to
Yeah.
point fingers,
Yeah.
where was the replacement? Like, that was
Mhm.
clearly an experiment that worked. Um, that where you brought in a guy who had been at a higher level, you bring him on as like senior defensive assistant or whatever you want to call him. But like it was very clear that Flores had a positive impact on the defense. There was an obvious understanding that he wasn't going to come back the next year, that he was looking for someone to bail him out of his pariah status so that he can then go back to pursuing his goals, which did not include being defensive coordinator of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Everybody was fine with that. But I've hammered the Steelers ever since. Like, where was the next guy? There were plenty of coaches that they could have brought in for that role after Brian Flores left, and they didn't. And the only real reason is just cheapness. Like, that's it. Like, it's,
Yeah.
I don't know how you consider yourself a first round organization if you can't have a top flight coaching staff. It's very clear that regardless of whatever happens at defensive coordinator, the Steelers do not. Now, I think they paid a little bit more for Arthur Smith, but it's still not this coaching staff that is just overflowing with talent. It's not, and I think it's pretty well known the Steelers don't pay that well. I don't think they get great talent pools when they open these jobs, and I think it's a long-term problem that they need to find a way to rectify. And they've picked some bad candidates too. Like, I'm not letting them off the hook for that, but like,
Mhm.
gosh, that one was just a free space. Like, that worked so well. They did it with Terrell Austin. It did work to promote him. By the way, I had somebody like comment to me like, Terrell Austin never did anything before the Steelers made him defensive coordinator. You all know he was defensive coordinator in the NFL for 5 years before the Steelers hired him, right? Like, God, people say the dumbest stuff. And but like, it worked with Austin, it worked with Flores. So do it again. No, or do it on offense. No, neither. Like, I just that's really frustrating. And I think there's no real reason not to do that. And especially with Tomlin's connections in the coaching world, so many guys would love to work for him.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, we were
like
pounding the table about Vrabel before he went to Cleveland, right? I mean, it
yeah,
was
I mean, literally went to Cleveland. Like, he would have. You telling me he wouldn't have rather come here? Come on, like, he's not from Cleveland. He went to Ohio State, but like, I
Mhm.
just, I think there's that's a frustrating. That's, to me, that's much more frustrating than Flores obviously wanting something the Steelers could not provide and moving on. Is that why not try it again? It worked so well.
Right. Yeah, that kind of goes back to the thing, like that was one result, right? But like the process worked. Why not continue to try to
Yeah.
turn that out and
Yeah,
have the
it worked
process keep
twice in a
going?
row. And I thought also, like, there were fringe benefits. I thought Tomlin was much better with challenges. For example, when he had Terrell Austin or Brian Flores in the booth.
Mhm.
And like, no disrespect whatsoever, but having Ryan Shazier in the booth this year is not providing the same level of ability of making those decisions as guys who have been NFL head coaches and defensive coordinators. It's just not.
Yeah. I actually had no clue that that was a thing. So if
Yeah.
we've talked about that before, wasn't didn't register. So that you just kind of broke news to me that that was a thing this year with Ryan Shazier.
Yeah. Yeah, he's one. I mean, there's a number of guys out there, but he's the one that kind of stands out to me from the defensive standpoint.
Okay. All right, get to one more here. Matt says, what aspect of the last 3 losses has garnered the most overreaction from the fan base, do you think? What is the most appropriate and what is the most appropriately criticized issue? I like this.
I think the overreaction is like, oh, losing 3 games in December again, as if like the calendar date makes the would it not apply if the first game had been played on November 30th? Like,
Yeah.
that's so dumb. Or if the last one had been played on January 1st, like, the calendar reading December means absolutely nothing to anything. I make fun of, like, baseball love stats like this. It's like, here comes now to the plate shortstop John Smith. He's batting .484 in games played with a 1 p.m. start in October under a full moon. Like,
Yeah.
why does anybody care? Like, it's and this is another. It's just trivia. It doesn't mean anything. It is literally there's no comparison between the losses to these three teams this year and the 3-game losing streak they won on it last December, other than they happened in December. We should just call it the Aquarius, what's December? Scorpio? It's the Steelers Scorpio losing streak because it's just astrology. There's no science there. You're just mysticizing something that doesn't matter.
When's Capricorn season?
I couldn't tell you.
I think we're actually might be in Capricorn season right now.
Capricorn. That shows you how little I know.
But no, Alan, that's actually where you're wrong. As soon as the calendar turns to December, what I heard is Mike Tomlin calls a meeting, says, "All right, guys, this is it. This is when we're going on the losing streak here. 3 in a row, and then we're good. We gotta get it out of our system, and then we're gonna jump back on the winning streak like they did last year."
The writers got lazy and they just put like ditto marks on this page. They're like, "Same thing you did last year. Just go for it."
Well, honestly, so they followed that up by winning 3 straight games to get into the postseason. So if a 3-game losing streak should be followed,
to get into the AFC Championship game would be fairly nice. I think people would be.
There you go. Yeah, I would.
I will say there is like a slightly delicious like path through the postseason where like the Steelers like can get through without like really like they can beat Houston, and then if somebody upsets Buffalo, they could get Baltimore in the second round, which is like the one team that is better than them that they just have had their number. Like there are actually like some like strangely not that hard paths forward for the postseason for them.
Give me that Chargers or Broncos Cinderella story, and then Russ gets redemption in the AFC Championship.
Like Jim gets revenge in the Harbowl in the first round of the playoffs, right? Like that. Yeah, there's definitely some ways forward for them that are not so daunting. But
it would be hilarious if all the lower seeds won, and then the Steelers somehow had a home playoff game in round 2.
There you go. Let's manifest that. I would love to not travel 2 weeks in a row. The part of it that has been the most appropriately reacted to, I think it is the proper identification of where the problems are in the defense. I think it's been pretty obvious on the tape, but I think the fans are picking up on it pretty well that like the communication issues are all between like 4 or 5 guys in the middle of that defense, and it's pretty blatant. And I think most people are getting the right message there.
Yeah, I mean, when you see cut-ups, regardless of who's putting them out, and you got guys throwing their hands up, hands on the helmets, looking around, looking in one direction, I think it's pretty clear where the problems lie. So I would say the same thing. Maybe even to a degree, if you're going to say that about the defense, at least the people that I see and that I talk to, I think from an offensive perspective as well, like again, like within this stretch, there's been times where they've been able to move the ball, even when they didn't have George. Like very clearly, they're a different offense with and without George, but it's really been the turnovers that them shooting themselves in the foot in the red zone struggles more than anything else.
Yep, I agree. I think that's good.
So there we go. Alan, you know the drill. Before we get out of here, tell the people they can find you.
At @Saunders_PGHMX, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky, PGH Steelers Now, sites account, SteelersNow.com. Go there, read the words so I can get paid, and like, subscribe, hit that bell for notifications here on the YouTube channel so you don't miss an episode.
There we go. And if you're listening somewhere else, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from, just search Steelers Afternoon Drive. Leave us a 5-star review and subscribe over there. Also search Steelers Afternoon Drive on TikTok. And then you'll find me everywhere, Zachary Smith, PGH, Alan Saunders, and myself. Thanks for jumping in and taking another ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive.